most common mistakes that you see some startups make? And you also talked about the fact that we have seen, and recently so many pivots actually taking a startup from failure to perhaps a much more stable future. What works when you get a pivot right, and what doesn't when it goes wrong?
Yeah. So the biggest mistake I see is, and it's an understandable one, I bet a lot of your viewers will identify with this. Okay, a startup needs to have customers. So the first thing we should do is go find a big market. So let's go find a big unserved market with unserved customers and go build a product that serves them. And that kind of makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. But the problem is it buys into an unknown assumption, or at least an unwritten assumption, which is the rules will persist in that market. The market as it's defined is the market that it'll be, and what I'm looking for is white space in the market. I'm looking for gaps in the market, but the market is what it's always been. Whereas what I find is that the great startups, the product creates the market. And so what a great startup does is, rather than merely get out of the building and study markets, they get out of the present and they catapult themselves to the future, or they spend time in the future and they build what's missing in the future. And so they discover the future before other people do, and then the future market becomes the market that they dominate. So that's what the successful companies do, is they find an insight that's born in the future, whereas the more conventional outcomes are find unserved needs and unmet pain in the markets of today. And the problem with that is incumbents can co-opt those innovations a lot more easily, and not just incumbents, but also more startups are likely to have the same idea. And so startups you don't even know about are likely to flood the space. And so you want to be in the future before other people are there. And that's where I've seen the biggest outcomes.
But this ability to anticipate change and anticipate the future and anticipate transformation, it's not a skill that we're taught.
That's right.
And it's hard to sort of have that.
That's right.
What do you think is the ability to have that kind of anticipation ability? What do you believe has resulted in that? In the startups that you worked with?
And it's also, right, you could argue it's a different kind of intelligence, right? So most of the time in life, we get rewarded for doing more of something. Like in school, we get rewarded if we answer the question the way the teacher wanted us to, because it's already been solved. And that's true in lots of things in life, right? We try to find a recipe for something. But the weird thing about breakthroughs is they've never happened before. So there can't be a recipe for a breakthrough, because like if you and I use the same recipe to make a cake, it's because somebody's figured out how to make that cake before, whereas a breakthrough hasn't happened yet. And so breakthroughs happen by adopting the right mindset. And breakthroughs happen by saying, I'm going to pursue something that I'm incredibly interested in for its own sake. And by doing that, you open new fractals of knowledge, right? So like, when the Mosaic browser happened and the internet took off, Mark Andreessen was making minimum wage at the University of Illinois in a supercomputer lab. Everybody thought the digital highway was going to be defined by Time Warner or by the US government or by world governments or by cable companies, telcos. And it's this kid who's making minimum wage who defines the future. And he wasn't saying, oh, I'm going to disrupt the digital superhighway. He probably didn't even know there was such a thing. He was just pursuing something he was wildly interested in for its own sake. And he opened new fractals of knowledge. And because he was at the edge of the technology, because he was getting his hands dirty and tinkering with it, he understood things and saw things before the rest of us did, because he was living in the future before the rest of us.
How important is it to be in the trenches and get your hands dirty? I mean, is that something that you've
seen
as...
Super important. Yeah, it's so like... And it relates back to expertise as well and living in the present. So if you look at the Wright brothers, experts were saying that it was impossible to make a plane fly, that human flight was just a pipe dream. In fact, the New York Times wrote an article called "Flying Machines Will Not Fly," 69 days before the Wright brothers flew a plane at Kitty Hawk. And when they wrote that article, they said it could take as much as 1 million years, according to experts, for humans to fly. And who were the Wright brothers? Were they aero-astro engineers? Were they experts at a university? Were they part of the Naval Academy? No, they were a couple of bike mechanics. And it was a couple of bicycle mechanics unencumbered with the quote-unquote knowledge that it was impossible that figured this thing out. And the laws of physics had to catch up to what the Wright brothers did. There were Bernoulli's laws that talked about how, a wing could lift a plane or something like that.
Yeah.
But like the laws had to be revised to accommodate the fact that the Wright brothers could make it fly. And that's happened a lot of times. The steam engine was invented before we completely understood thermodynamics. So quite often it's the outsider who's unburdened by the present, who doesn't have any attachment to being an expert, to being the final answer. They just tinker with things and they just say, hey, you say it can't be done, but I'm going to try. Let's see what happens.
Since we're talking about people who try and make things happen, who are you betting on today? I mean, who's looking exciting to you from the perspective of being able to be a category creator, create the future before it is, before we know what it looks like?
Yeah, there's several people. I think that one company that we've worked with recently that I like a lot is called SmarterDX, and it helps hospitals better diagnose patient claims, and so sometimes the patients don't have to pay as much money, or the hospitals get adequately paid for certain types of medical bills. So that one's doing well. And then one that I just mentioned a minute ago was Applied Intuition. And so Applied Intuition is creating a new category of software that helps companies modernize their cars. And so cars are becoming more and more software defined at their core. And so Applied Intuition is helping companies achieve that reality. Whereas in the past, car companies are much more focused on their existing supply chains and their existing manufacturing and how cars have been traditionally built. So that'd be another one.
So is this a good time to start up, given the fact that we're living in an era where the incumbents are getting larger and larger, and there are regulatory headwinds for startups, and it is a challenging environment, but is this a good time to start up?
I think it is, and I think it's getting better and better. So this may date me a little bit, but when I was in high school, if you had asked me who is the most famous business person in the world, people probably would have said Jack Welch. That's probably who I would have said. I'm embarrassed to say I don't know who the CEO of GE is right now. I don't know who the CEO of Coca-Cola is right now. But my kids, they know who Elon Musk is, or Jeff Bezos. And what I'm finding is almost without knowing it, hidden in plain sight, the pattern breakers are now defining business and culture. In the 20th century, it was the organization man. It was, the reasonable executive that won. And it was the managerial class that ran these institutions. But now what I'm finding is the people who are defining business and our culture are the pattern breakers. And, in order to succeed in the economy ahead, we have to know what they're doing. We have to understand how these people are wired. Because that's what it's going to take to see around corners and to succeed and thrive. This is going to be a century for the disagreeables, for the people who say, hey.
The unreasonable man.
That's right. Like George Bernard Shaw used to say, the reasonable man, adapts to the world, and the unreasonable man, makes the world adapt to them. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man.
Yeah.
We've just come from a century where that wasn't true. We've come from a century where we celebrated the quote-unquote reasonable man. And that's fine, but that works better in an inherited institution where the job of the institution is to keep doing what it's been doing and to compound its advantages. But if you want something new, you need the pattern breaker. And increasingly, I think we're seeing a lot of our institutions need to be reinvigorated. They need to be, we need to upset the apple cart a little bit and sort of, shock them a little bit into being more effective and sort of not slowing down, stagnating.